The toolbox is the primary panel we'll be using to draw in Flash. I've positioned mine over here on the left hand side. Remember, we can make it single column, double column, or you can stretch it out further. I usually like to work in the double column. We select the tool by clicking it in the toolbox, and you'll notice that the selected tool is depressed and the border or the background of it is a little bit darker. You'll also notice that some tools have a little triangle in the bottom right hand corner of that tool. That means there are other tools underneath that tool. For example, if I were to hold the mouse button down on the rectangle tool, I get a pop-up that shows the tools that are under that. And I can choose the rectangle, the oval, the rectangle primitive, oval primitive, or poly star. If I choose the oval tool, you'll notice that the tool in the toolbox reflects that, and I can draw ovals. If I go back to the rectangle, I'm going to draw rectangles. So I've created a graphic that shows the tools that are underneath each of the tools, and I have both a single column and double column toolbox shown here. You'll notice there are some dividing lines also between sections in the toolbox. This top section consists of our selection tools. These are tools we can use to select objects and manipulate objects. The next section is our drawing tools. This allows us to draw items on the stage as well as add text to the stage. So it's things we would put on the stage that we would create with the tools in this section of the toolbox. This next section might be referred to as the color tools or miscellaneous tools. There are tools here for changing fill and stroke colors, erasing, and selecting a color. But there's also some tools here for creating a skeleton. You'll see this little bone tool. So I refer to these as the miscellaneous tools. There are environmental tools that allow us to zoom in and zoom out, or to pan our stage if we're zoomed in. Here are the color selection tools. Allows us to select a stroke or a fill color out of 16.7 million different colors. And then finally, the bottom section here, these are options for whatever tool is selected, and we'll see these items change constantly as we select different tools. Now, if you've never done any digital drawing, and I ask you to draw something in Flash and to select a tool to do that with, I think most students want to select the pencil tool, because that's what we tend to draw with paper and pencil. But in drawing with digital and drawing on the computer, it's a different paradigm. And I would say avoid the pencil. I never hardly use the pencil. It's one of the least used tools in my toolbox. In fact, there's really only a few tools that I use consistently when I'm drawing and creating things in Flash. So here are the tools I've highlighted in green that are the tools I use a lot of. This is called the selection tool up here in the upper left-hand corner. And then the sub-selection tool. Those allow us to select objects or select points of an object and manipulate them. There's the free transform tool with all these little dots on a square and a little arrow here. That allows me to manipulate a drawn object, resize it, rotate it, so forth. Underneath it is the gradient transform tool, which is used for manipulating gradients. We're going from one color to another color. I use the text tool a lot to create both static and dynamic text. But for drawing, I'm primarily using the line, the rectangle, and the oval. And you can pretty much draw everything with those three tools along with the selection tools are really all you need. I do use the paint bucket to change fill colors, or oftentimes I'll draw objects without fills, and then I'll use the paint bucket to come back later and add those fills. The zoom tool is great for being able to zoom in and out and look at the details, make sure lines are connecting really well. And then of course we're selecting colors both for the stroke and the fill. I can pretty much create anything in Flash with just those tools. There are a few tools that I use occasionally. There's a pen tool, and there are ways to delete and add points to a object. So anchor points, delete anchor points, subtract anchor points in the pen tool. I don't use the pen tool that much, Now if you've taken Photoshop from me, you know that I say in Photoshop the pen is one of the most important, if not the most important tool for making selections around objects. And so I really emphasize using the pen in Photoshop. Not so much in Flash. Since everything in Flash is already object-oriented or vectored, the line, the rectangle, and the oval tools are really what I use for drawing, much more so than the pen tool. But occasionally it comes in handy, as does the primitive rectangle and the primitive oval. And once in a while I will use the brush tool. Probably use that a little more than I would use the pen tool or pencil tool. The ink bottle is used to add strokes to objects. I'm usually drawing objects with strokes, but not always, and so sometimes I will use that tool. The eraser tool, surprisingly, I don't use a whole lot because you can click on objects, select them, and delete them using the different selection tools and the delete key on the keyboard. So the eraser tool doesn't get used very much. The eyedropper tool allows me to select colors, and so I will use that to select maybe a color that I've used previously that was custom and I want to match it. The hand tool or the pan tool allows me to pan through items when I'm zoomed in. And then there are two options here for the fill and stroke colors. The first one sets the stroke to black and the fill to white. That's handy sometimes. And then the second one will swap those colors. So I use those tools once in a while. Then there are tools in the toolbox that I hardly ever use, and I've highlighted those in red. The top two here are the 3D rotation and the 3D translation tools. I don't do a whole lot of stuff with 3D. You will do a few things with 3D in the labs that are part of the textbook for this course. And then the lasso tool allows you to select an irregularly shaped area. Again, don't use that very much in Flash. Might use it more in Photoshop. Although in Flash it does come in handy sometimes if you've got objects that are real close together and you want to select around them. I might use the lasso for that, but very rarely do I use it. Underneath the rectangle tool, that grouping of drawing tools is the poly star. It allows you to create polygons and stars. It's a really cool tool. I just haven't found a whole lot of use for it. I might use it in creating a triangle or an octagon shape, but very rarely do I need to do that. The pencil tool, again, is the one that most people want to try to use a lot, but you just don't get good results with it. You get much better results drawing with the line, the rectangle, and the oval and manipulating those objects. There's a spray brush underneath the brush that is also kind of cool. Allows you to do some spattering effects. Might come in handy if you need some stars in the sky or something, but it's not a tool that I use very often. The deco tool is really cool, but again, just haven't found a lot of use for it. But it allows you to create things like skylines and trees and so forth that are pre-designed for you, or symmetrical designs. Like I said, it's really cool. I just tend not to use it in projects that I'm working on. And then the bone tool and the bind tool in CS6 allows us to create skeletons that we can manipulate. To be honest, these tools were never really implemented very well, and if you're using the new Adobe Flash Creative Cloud, these tools are no longer part of the toolbox. They've been deprecated. Again, just really weren't implemented well. So one last thing about the toolbox, as you point to different tools, you'll see the name of the tool, but you also see a letter in parentheses. That is the keyboard shortcut to select that tool. So you'll notice the selection tool has a keyboard shortcut of V, and I currently have the bone tool selected here. If I press the letter V, you'll notice that that tool becomes selected. The line tool is N. If I press N, that tool becomes selected. The rectangles are, the ovals O, and so forth. Sometimes it's helpful to remember those. In this class, as I demonstrate things, I'm primarily going to go over and click things in the toolbox. But if, again, you're up here and you've got the selection tool and you want to draw an oval, just press the letter O, and notice that the rectangle tool changed the oval tool. It is now selected. By the way, the keyboard shortcuts, of course, do not work when you're using the text tool because they're expecting you to type text into a text box, and so therefore the keyboard shortcuts don't work for that once you're in a text box. So that's the essence of the Flash Toolbox. In the next video, we'll start drawing with some of the drawing tools and seeing how to manipulate objects.